When I first met my sister-in-law, she didn't seem to like me. She would look me up and down with a harsh stare and laugh quietly to herself. I thought she was probably making fun of my appearance. I felt like I was someone she could easily mock or belittle to feel better about herself. So, when she asked for my help, I said no. I couldn't think of any reason to help her. My name is Maria. I married my husband 3 years ago, and now we live with my in-laws. My father-in-law died when my husband was still in school, so it's just me, my husband, my sister-in-law, Dorothy, and my mother-in-law living together. At first, we didn't plan to live with them. It was just my husband and me. But a year after we got married, my mother-in-law had an accident and hurt her leg. So, we decided to move in to help take care of her. Dorothy was already living at home, but my mother-in-law sadly told my husband that Dorothy was not helpful at all. Dorothy was single and spent her money going out to bars and clubs instead of helping her mother. It would have been nice if she at least helped her mom, but instead, she made things worse by maxing out credit cards, asking her mom for money, and leaving her to do all the housework even though her leg was hurt from the accident. I honestly think my mother-in-law is too lenient with her daughter. Dorothy is in her late 20s, but parents often feel they need to take care of their kids, no matter how old they are. That's why, even though my mother-in-law knows her daughter is unreliable, she feels she can't kick her out and lets her stay. I really didn't want to live with them. My mother-in-law is kind and gentle, but living together is hard, even with nice people. Most of all, I hated the idea of living with my sister-in-law. I wouldn't want to live with Dorothy even if someone paid me. I felt like she looked down on me from the start of our marriage. To put it simply, Dorothy is like a bossy friend who changes her group of friends one by one. I might sound childish for saying this, but I've always thought my sister-in-law was a mean person who used others for her own benefit. From the moment my husband introduced me to her, I felt she didn't like me. When she asked my name and I told her, she tried to hide a laugh. I'm 32 years old, but I think she laughed because she thought I was younger than I looked. She even said, "I thought you were about 40. You look so mature." This meant she thought I looked older than I really am. Since then, every time she saw me, she would comment on my clothes, mock my appearance, and laugh at me. She would say things like, "A grown woman over 30 wearing fast fashion? Oh my. Or you seem out of touch. Were you homeschooled? You don't seem like you'd fit in with my fashionable friends." I'm not someone who cares a lot about fashion, and I know I don't stand out in my style. Just because Dorothy thinks I don't dress well doesn't give her the right to make fun of me. I do have a few friends, and I feel sorry for anyone who says they like me when they see me being ridiculed so much. I knew we didn't get along from the start, and things just seemed to get worse. Since she had this attitude, I decided it was best to avoid her as much as I could. I chose to ignore her instead of arguing or pointing out her flaws. Then suddenly, my mother-in-law needed help, and the idea of living together came up. I told my husband that I really didn't want to live with Dorothy, but then my mother-in-law called and asked if I would reconsider. She was 62 at the time and planned to move into a senior living facility with support services when she turned 65. In 3 years. My mother-in-law asked if we could please share a home until she moved into a senior living facility. Faced with her desperate request, I couldn't find the words to say no. Although living together was a big ask, I thought of it as a limited arrangement. This made me agree to the plan. So, my husband and I have been living with his mother and sister for 2 years now, with only 1 more year left. My mother-in-law is keeping her promise and is actively looking for supportive housing, so our living arrangement won't last forever. I feel a bit guilty, like I'm pushing her out, but she reassures me that this was her plan all along. She likely wanted to take her time organizing the house during these 3 years. Looking back, I feel guilty for not agreeing to live together from the start, but the thought of living with my sister-in-law was really unpleasant. I needed time to prepare for it, and living with her has been challenging. Even now, I struggle with our daily interactions. At the beginning, Dorothy was especially harsh. She complained about the food I cooked and constantly criticized my cleaning. My mother-in-law and husband would scold her for this, but she didn't seem to care. It felt like she viewed me not as her brother's wife but more like a servant or maid. For about a week, she blamed me for how I washed her clothes. She said, "You shrank my clothes because of the detergent you chose. They're all misshapen and unwearable now. After 3 years of marriage, you still can't handle housework. You're basically useless." I wanted to tell her that the clothes shrank because she had gained weight, not because of me, but I didn't want to say something hurtful about her appearance, knowing how damaging those comments can be. So, I just said I'd be more careful next time and tried to end the conversation. But Dorothy isn't the type to forgive and forget. When my mother-in-law's friend visited, Dorothy laughed as she talked about how terrible I was at housework. My mother-in-law defended me, but Dorothy insisted there was no need and kept talking as if I were a useless appliance, not a human being or her relative. Sometimes I argued back, but mostly I just nodded and let her words wash over me. I didn't want to sink to her level and knew arguing would be pointless. I told my mother-in-law and husband that once we stopped living together this year, I didn't want anything to do with Dorothy, and they both agreed. I might be a bit spiteful, but I think Dorothy will have a hard time when my mother-in-law moves into a senior living facility. Dorothy has been living at home and spending her salary however she wants. I don't think someone like her can suddenly live on her own responsibly. Once we stop living together, we won't help her, and that feels like a little revenge. But sometimes it seems like even God is on my sister-in-law's side. She told me her boyfriend proposed to her. She said, "My boyfriend is tall, handsome, and kind. He has a great job at a big company, so I'm basically marrying into money. I'm so glad I worked on my looks and fashion. I wouldn't want a miserable life like someone I know living with in-laws after marriage." She laughed while looking at me, making it clear she was talking about me. Dorothy stood in front of me, smirking, and said, "I bet you thought I wouldn't be able to live on my own without my mom. Too bad for you, old lady." I couldn't help but blush a little because she hit the nail on the head with what I was thinking about her. At the same time, I felt a strong wave of frustration. "Congratulations on your engagement, but married life is tough, you know," I said. She might complain about my housework skills, but the one who really can't do anything is Dorothy. It was the best comeback I could think of, but she just looked triumphant. "Are you trying to act tough because I won't be around? My fiancé is rich and will hire a professional housekeeper, not someone useless like you." I felt utterly defeated. I had sworn I would never see Dorothy again once we stopped living together, so I decided to avoid her as much as possible during the remaining time we had as housemates. A month after Dorothy's announcement, her fiancé came to visit. I thought anyone who chose her couldn't be a good person. I even thought something terrible. Dorothy had warned me not to introduce myself to her fiancé. "I don't consider you family. Just serve the tea and go away. I'm not inviting you to the wedding anyway." I felt relieved when I heard that. I just wanted to cut ties with her as soon as possible. When her fiancé arrived, I reluctantly served tea as instructed. Knowing this might be the first and last time we met, I stole a quick glance at Dorothy's fiancé, and when I did, our eyes met. As her fiancé began to speak, Dorothy interrupted, saying it wasn't a big deal and told him I was just the housekeeper. "You don't have to worry, Steve. I told you before, right? I have a useless sister-in-law who can't do anything. It's a loss to get involved with her, so you can ignore her." Hearing that, I bowed my head slightly to her fiancé and left the room, feeling embarrassed. Then Dorothy's fiancé called my name. Maria, you were a senior consultant at the firm, right? I can't believe you're married to Dorothy's brother. Steve looked at me in disbelief. He was actually familiar to me. He was my junior at work until I quit after getting married. I had heard he changed jobs after that, but neither of us expected to meet again like this. Dorothy, I've heard a lot about your sister-in-law before, but I never knew it was Maria. I thought she must be a terrible person since you've only said bad things about her. But we used to work together. I know who she is. Dorothy didn't seem to understand why Steve was upset. I started to feel anxious about how badly my character had been misrepresented. You two knew each other? Dorothy asked bitterly. Steve explained how we had worked closely together. I had helped him at work and even lent him money when his mother needed surgery. I felt it was natural to help him as a senior at work, especially since my grandfather had just passed away and left me some inheritance. I never thought he would feel so indebted to me, but I realized that the money must have been a real lifesaver for him. Maria was a true friend to me, and yet you treat her like a housekeeper, Steve said. I know you can be harsh, but I can't stand someone who treats people like this. I need to rethink this. Our engagement is off. With a cold stare, Steve told Dorothy he was breaking off their engagement and tried to leave. Desperate to stop him, Dorothy grabbed his jacket as he got up from the sofa. No, it's not like that. This is just how Maria and I communicate. We joke around a lot, right, Maria? Dorothy looked to me for help in a panic, but I could only shake my head. Sorry, I can't lie. Hearing this, Dorothy broke down crying. Why are you ruining my marriage? It's your fault the engagement is off. She yelled and raised her hand to hit me, but my husband rushed in to stop her. Still lashing out, Dorothy was slapped by my mother-in-law. It's not Maria's fault. It's yours. You've been harassing her and causing trouble all this time. I won't tolerate it anymore. It's your own fault the engagement is off. You need to take responsibility for your actions. You will leave the house by the end of the month. At that moment, my mother-in-law finally snapped and decided to cut ties with her own daughter. Mom, you're on Maria's side too? Dorothy asked her mother, staring at her in disbelief. You are not a child anymore. Take care of yourself, my mother-in-law said. She then bowed her head to Steve and returned to her bedroom. From the other room, we could only hear Dorothy sobbing. Steve told me he would be in touch soon, and then he left our house. My husband and I exchanged glances. Maybe it's time for us to start looking for a new home, I suggested. My husband nodded in agreement, and from that moment on, we decided to move on with our lives as if Dorothy didn't exist. 3 months passed, and my mother-in-law moved to a senior housing facility. We also moved to a place as close as possible to her and began the process of selling the family home. Dorothy stayed locked up in her room until the day we moved, but we couldn't leave her behind, so we packed her belongings into boxes and sent them to a storage unit. On the day of the move, we gave my sister-in-law the bare essentials, the key to the storage unit, and the $3,000 severance payment we had received from my mother-in-law. It seemed like Dorothy had lost all motivation after her broken engagement and quit her job. I don't know what happened to her after that, and it seems Steve isn't in contact with her anymore. He told me that he was saved once again because of me. If I had gone through with that marriage, I would have definitely regretted it. You've always been my lifesaver, he said. I couldn't help but feel guilty because, in a way, Steve has been my lifesaver too. I had wished for my sister-in-law to struggle in the end, but maybe doing good deeds brings rewards like this. That's how I felt. My sister-in-law had treated me like a slave and constantly harassed me, which is probably why things turned out this way. I've never seen or felt God, but from now on, I want to live a life where I can hold my head up high,